Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes.
A message from our sponsor, Curtis Brown Creative. If you're an aspiring author, you'll be excited to hear that this week's sponsors are Curtis Brown Creative, the renowned writing school affiliated to the major literary agency.
Since launching in 2011, over 150 of their students have gone on to get major book deals, including best-selling authors Jessie Burton, Jane Harper and Kate Hamer.
CBC run a wide range of courses for writers at different stages of their creative journeys. If you have a complete first draft of a novel and want guidance as you embark on your rewrite, as well as crucial insights into the publishing process, then their best-selling Edit and Pitch Your Novel course is for you.
This 6-week online course includes exclusive teaching videos from CBC's founder Anna Davis and the agents at top UK literary agencies Curtis Brown and C&W. Students also get the opportunity to receive individual feedback from one of CBC's expert fiction editors.
Visit www.curtisbrowncreative.co.uk to find out more about all the courses they offer.
Curtis Brown Creative have provided an exclusive discount for Always Take Notes listeners. You could use the code ATN20 for £20 off the full price of any 4 or 6-week online writing course.
Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Simon speaks with David Shelley, CEO of Hachette UK.
I spoke with David about starting his career at independent publisher Allison & Busby, about his path to become CEO of Hachette, and about attempts to diversify the publishing industry.
It's a great episode. We hope you enjoy it.
David, welcome to Always Take Notes. It's great to have you on the show. I wanted to start off really at the beginning of your career and also, I suppose, at the beginning of your life. Is it correct that you were born in Germany, but then you grew up above a secondhand bookshop in East Sussex?
That is true. I spent the first 3 years of my life in Germany because my father was out there doing a job, and then he started a bookshop in Lewes in East Sussex, and as a family we lived above the shop. So yeah, that is all correct.
And what kind of stuff was in the shop? Was it an antiquarian bookshop or a broader selection of stuff?
It was a mixture. So it was antiquarian and secondhand, basically. So there were sort of kind of old Penguin paperbacks, and then some, more antiquarian stuff as well. And he specialised in a few different things, but firstly, material relating to Sussex and Lewes, where it was, and also geology as well, and Japan.
Quite an eclectic collection. And then it's right that you went to state school, and then you were the first person in your family to go to university when you went on to Oxford.
That's right, yeah.
And what was it like arriving at Oxford and coming into that environment?
I do remember my first night there. I was having drinks in someone's room, and everyone was talking about their nannies and who their nannies had been and what their names were. And someone was describing being riding on a horse around a paddock with a plank strapped to his back by his nanny. And I remember just thinking, oh my God, what on earth is this? What on earth have I done? I'd only ever read about nannies in books. I didn't know that actual people had nannies.
What was the plank for?
I think to make sure he had a very straight back.
I see.
Okay. So I guess it sort of taught equestrian skills and posture at the same time.
So very, very, very practical. And then when you left university, is it right that you wanted initially to work in poetry publishing, but realised that was a very small world and that there were no one was kind of moving on and moving up in that?
Yeah, I mean, it was my absolute dream. I love poetry, and when I was at university, I was sort of really into the Poetry Society and led the Poetry Society in Oxford, which was amazing, and met some really interesting poets. So it was my absolute kind of passion. And when I left, I was just intent on becoming a poetry publisher, and I did work experience in two wonderful poetry publishers, Anvil Press and Carcanet. And what I discovered in both of them is A, they were both really small, and B, everyone who worked there loved working there, and wasn't, that there just weren't any other opportunities. I think if something had come up, then I hope I think I'd probably still be a poetry publisher now, because it's a wonderful world to operate in, a wonderful medium.
And were you a Craig Raine protege coming out of university? Because it seems that there's been a kind of lineage of people that he taught at Oxford who've gone in all sorts of areas in the kind of literary world.
I was taught by Craig Raine. I wouldn't say I was a protege, but I was taught by him. Yeah.
And then, so you get this job at a small publishing house at Allison and Busby, and then you're made publishing director when you're 23. And what was that like? How did that experience come about, and how were the reins handed to you when you were at such an early stage in your career?
Yeah, it was a very unusual situation in that Allison and Busby had been owned when I joined it for some time by a Spanish company called Editorial Prensa Ibérica. And my boss at the time was a wonderful man called Peter Day. He had to retire because of ill health. He had a stroke and had to retire. Then someone else came in who the Spanish company Editorial Prensa Ibérica didn't feel had worked out. And so the boss of Editorial Prensa Ibérica, a brilliant man called Javier Mol, he called me over to Barcelona and said, look, I know you're only 23, but this company's in serious trouble, and I think I'm either going to close it down, or I'm going to give you a chance just to see if you can make it work. And so it was a very strange situation to be in at that age. I mean, it was a very small company. It was 5 people, but I basically had to make a decision. Am I going to, at the age of 23, try and run a very small company, but run a company, or am I going to? I'd always imagined I would do the usual sort of career trajectory of, being an editorial assistant, then an assistant editor, then moving to a bigger company, and etc. But I sort of thought, well, if I don't do this, I'll always wonder what it could have been like. And also, I didn't want the company to be closed down. I sort of thought, well, if this is, it had a wonderful heritage. So I just thought it would be incredibly sad if it were closed down, and I'd love to try and make it work. But I was very, very scared as well. It was petrified.
And is it right that 2 months later the distributor went bust?
Yeah, they were trying to become millennium compliant. I don't know if you remember all of that when. Okay. So companies were trying to update their computer.
Oh, right, to avoid the Y2K bug.
But in so doing, it completely fucked the computer system up, and the whole thing went bust. So I had to find a new distributor, which is a 23-year-old who knows nothing about book distribution. Was an education.
What kind of stuff were you publishing?
So Allison and Busby's, it was founded in 1967, and actually I was always, and up to this day, it has always been a mixture of sort of literary fiction, crime fiction, commercial fiction, mixed kind of trade non-fiction, really quite eclectic, and usually sort of about who the publishers are there, and what their tastes are and what they like, but in those broad categories.
And I saw in an interview you gave about that time, you said that it was an absolute reality check that publishing is a business. Could you talk about how that was, drilled into you then, and how maybe that has stayed with you since that point?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I went into publishing because I love poetry. I suppose I had no conception particularly of it as a business. And until I was handed the reins at Allison and Busby, I'd never really thought about that, how we paid our bills, how many books we needed to sell in order to pay bills and staff and all of that. And it was only when I was faced with this thing, and my boss in Spain had said to me, well, basically you need to make sure there's enough money coming in to pay everyone and to pay for everything. Otherwise we are going to close it down. That really sharpened my mind. And I had good people. He had good people in Spain who explained to me what a P&L is, what accounts are. But I mean, look, I got a B in maths I got a C in maths, and my teacher was amazed that I got a C in maths. So at GCSE. So I'm not a person who came from a sort of very numerical background. That's never been my interest. But having to do all of that meant that I really focused a lot, just because I didn't want the company to be closed down, and I wanted to pay all the bills.
It's quite, I mean, it's completely different, but also oddly similar to the experience. We had Rosie Nixon, the editor of Hello magazine, on the show, and she also had a sort of distant Spanish patriarch that kind of owned this company and had to fly to Spain and do all of that. I was wondering, could we talk about one of these books that you mentioned from this period? So in 2001, the Encyclopedia of Cult Children's Television, where did that come about and how did that fit into what you were doing at that time?
So that for me was a key book, I suppose, in my career, in that it was an idea that I had. So I had this task, which was to make money to keep the company going. And I thought, well, at the time, there's a lot of sort of nostalgia about, stuff that people grew up with of my age. I was obviously young then, kind of in our childhood. And I thought, well, what about a book about cult children's TV, kind of funny, right, whatever. And it's one of, I suppose now one would call it an IP project, and intellectual property project, an idea that I came up with, and then I got a very funny, talented writer called Richard Lewis to write the book. And it was sort of a key book for me because it was, I guess, where creativity and commerce come together. That's an idea that I had. I kind of put the package together. Richard wrote a brilliant book. And then it sold really, really well for us. I mean, in Alison and Busby terms, which was about 35,000 copies, which for us was huge. So for me, it's a very happy memory. Firstly, working with Richard, the writer. I guess secondly, that I come up with the idea that you didn't just need to wait for agents to send you books or writers to send you books. You could come up with an idea. And then thirdly, it was really important because it made quite a lot of money for the company. And was the first, I suppose, big hit that we had when I was there, and enabled us to, pay our bills, pay our staff, do all the things we needed to do and to carry on. So it was a mixture of things.
And where did the Black Book? So that was a few years earlier, but that's 1998, right? So that was also during your early years there.
Yeah, and I picked that book because it's this wonderful, wonderful literary novel called The Black Book by Tom Drury, who is an absolute genius. He's to my mind one of the best living writers, American writer. And I would say it's a kind of picaresque novel about a man who has to live in FBI protection, but it's sort of a I don't know what you'd call it. It kind of meanders around, but it's beautifully written. It's really well observed. I picked that book because that was a book I was absolutely passionate about, one of the first books that I published, and I was super excited about it. And I knew that this guy was incredibly talented, and I knew that it was an important book. However, it really sold not many copies at all. So I picked that one because I think that's something you also have to negotiate as a publisher, which is that sometimes the books that you absolutely love don't sell the way that you want them to. And there's a certain amount of, I wouldn't, it's not too strong a word to say, heartbreak about that. And I guess that was, well, Cult Children's TV was a really positive, happy experience of creativity and commerce coming together. The Black Book was a case of something where I wanted to make the author proud by selling lots of copies. I wanted to reach lots of readers with it. I wanted everyone to feel what I did about it. And for whatever reason, I mean, maybe because it's not a book that can be described very easily, it just didn't. And that was, I guess, a lesson to me that sometimes you have to deal with that. The books that you really care about and believe in don't sell as well as you want them to. And that's really hard. It's really hard because you want to do well by the author.
What happened to the author's career after that book?
He has gone on to write other wonderful novels that, to my mind, have never sold in the quantities that they should do, given how talented he is. And every so often, someone will write an article about him saying he's an absolute genius. Why doesn't he sell more copies? Why isn't he recognised? I am also cognizant, now doing the job that I do in Hachette, that we have in our list, we have the Virago and Virago Modern Classics. I'm conscious there are books in Virago Modern Classics that, when they were published in the author's lifetime, never sold that many copies, and now 50 years later are acclaimed as major classics. So I feel often that's the way in publishing as well. And someone like Tom Drury, I wouldn't be at all surprised if in 30 years, whatever, people, he's the sort of author that's rediscovered and sells. And I think that's another lesson about publishing, is sometimes there are books that sell incredibly well in their first year, and there are other books that really don't sell well, but are discovered much, much later.
Could you tell us about your move to Little Brown? So you're 29 and you're hired to be a crime editor. So that's quite a long way from poetry, where you'd sort of wanted to start out. How had that journey taken place?
Well, when I was at Allison, I've always enjoyed reading crime fiction. When I was at Allison and Busby, I realised that actually the crime list was one of the most profitable lists. And it was one of the ways, with this task in mind of keeping Allison and Busby going, paying the bills, paying the authors, paying the staff. It was one of those things that I realised, okay, we need to ramp this up a bit because it's a very successful list. So I'd done quite a lot of crime publishing at Allison and Busby, and there'd been some authors who'd done well. And so I suppose that was an area in the industry. I guess some people had noticed, Allison and Busby's doing more crime, the crime's doing quite well. The person who hired me at Little Brown, very inspiring publisher, Ursula Mackenzie, she and her team had spotted that I'd done that. And so she wanted that the current crime editor was retiring, and she wanted someone to replace the current crime editor, Hilary Hale, who was a legend in her own right. And I think Hilary who'd recommended me to Ursula. And to begin with, actually, I'll be frank, I turned the job down because I thought, well, I'm actually loving now. This was I'd run Allison Busby for 5 years. It was making some money. It was growing fast. I loved having the autonomy. I loved being able to publish all the books that I liked, and to have this mixture. But then, so to begin with, I turned the job down, and then I thought about it over Christmas. And my partner, who's now my husband, he said to me, well, look, you keep going on and on about this, you've turned it down, but it's clearly playing on your mind. And it clearly was it's clearly another thing that if you don't do it, you'll always wonder about it. I think you should call Ursula up and tell her you made a mistake, and that you would like the job. So that's what I did. And it was sort of on the basis that I'd had all this freedom, this autonomy running this company, but equally, there was something at the back of my mind that I knew that there are things that big publishers do that small publishers don't do. And I always like to learn. I always like to do new things. And I thought, well, I'll never learn that stuff if I always stay at a small publisher, as much as I love it. And even if this is a much smaller role at a large company, I'll learn how to sell books in supermarkets, how to sell books online, how to do marketing campaigns, all the things that I'd never really got a chance to do. So at the end of the day, it sort of felt like an opportunity I had to take up, even though the range was much narrower than my previous role.
We had Val McDermid on the podcast recently, and we've had Ian Rankin on before. A point that they raised was that the kind of status of crime fiction over the last 30 years has had a tremendous change from being something that people were quite snooty about, regarding it very much in a genre silo, to this idea that it's a more expansive kind of groove that you can bring all sorts of other things into. Were you conscious of that change going on as well?
I would say definitely. So that was 2005. I would say definitely then there was still an enormous snootiness about it. I mean, to be honest, I would say there still is. I think people don't. I don't think there's a snootiness among readers. When you sort of see research, you see that actually readers don't classify themselves in that way, and a reader wouldn't differentiate a Val McDermid novel or an Ian Rankin novel from an Ian McEwan novel or a Julian Barnes novel. They would just be books they enjoy, and readers tend not to just read in one genre. And but within the industry, there is this there can be this sort of snootiness, and particularly I'd say with literary prizes and things. I would say in 2005, it would have been unthinkable that a crime novel could ever be up for the Booker. I think that's a really welcome development in the last few years. So yeah, I was definitely conscious. I was definitely conscious of it within the industry, and crime editors, I would say at that time, were definitely looked down upon. Probably crime and women's fiction editors were looked down upon by more literary editors.
And what was some of the work that you were doing in digital publishing when you first moved to Little Brown? I've seen that when you got there, you found that ebooks were doing about £100 a year in turnover, and then this is pre-iPhone, pre-Kindle. Like, what was going on in that space, and what did you do?
So actually, I mean, I did very little. Ursula was very ahead of her time in that she absolutely saw this coming and had been intent on converting all the physical books into ebook format and making them available, which in 2005 very few publishers were doing. When I joined, I guess because I was ambitious and because I like to learn things, I said to her, can I do something more apart from the crime fiction? And she said, oh, well, okay, you can have audio and ebooks. And audio was a serious business, reasonably serious business at that time, although nothing like it is now. But ebooks was this tiny business, and I was excited by the idea of ebooks. And then, yes, as you saw, I got in and discovered it was about £100 a year. So commercially, not that exciting. But I basically continued to do the thing that Ursula had always done, which was to make all the books available, try and find any routes to market that there were. And then what was very exciting, about 2008, the Kindle was launched. And there was this absolute explosion. So sort of by being in the right place at the right time, I was, able to see that and to be part of that digital revolution, which was hugely, hugely exciting. And I can't really emphasize enough what a change that was in ebook and in audio, of course, because when in audio, it's interesting. When I joined in 2005, I mean, cassettes still made up 40% of the revenue. So CDs were 60%, cassettes in 2005 were 40%.
And everything was abridged, right? Because you had limitations. And
everything was abridged, yeah, almost because to do unabridged would be 20 CDs or something, or 20, or even more tapes. It wouldn't be feasible. So you had to do, and often it was there were some brilliant abridgments, but it was quite hard because if you're cutting down a novel from effectively like 150,000 words to 40 or 50,000, you take out a lot, and in abridgments they'd have to take out subplots and things like that. So it was often artistically quite a fraught and unsatisfactory process. So that was very exciting, being able to, over the next few years, transition from these CDs and the tape to be able to retire the tapes finally, which I think we did in 2008, 2009, and then the CDs, and then move to this sort of unabridged digital model was really exciting.
But it seems that some of the predictions that were around at that time that ebooks were going to kill the paper book and so forth, that didn't come to pass. And I read a while ago a really interesting piece about the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2009, where people were kind of in this sort of existential fear that paper books were not going to exist and everything like that. And actually, it seems that the market has achieved a sort of equilibrium. How do you think that came about?
I think, and I would say, having looked at the growth in those early years myself, I would have put myself in the camp. I don't think I ever thought paper books would stop existing, because we could still see strong pull from the market always. But I did think that ebooks would gain more of a stranglehold. I think what actually happened is that there was what I think the analysis didn't take account of is there was an enormous novelty factor. When Kindles first came out, the novelty of it was just extraordinary. And, other e-readers obviously as well. And people would just absolutely kind of binge on ebooks, that just being able to, it is extraordinary being able to get a book wherever you are in the world at any time of day or night is an amazing thing. Being able to go on holiday just with this tiny thing with 15-20 books loaded up on it, for people who like to read a lot, it was amazing. But I think what happened is then there were some people who thought, well, I'm only going to read on this going forward. But a lot of people thought, well, actually, I love this, but I love my paper books as well, my print books. And so I think the majority of readers then settled down to I'll use my Kindle in these particular situations. And I hear this a lot from people. I use my Kindle on the plane. I use it when I'm, on holiday. But when I'm at home, I like print books, or I like non-fiction in print. I like fiction, ebook, whatever. But there was more of a mix that people had. We also hadn't figured on that actually the sort of the people who like ebooks the most tend to be older readers, which is I guess counterintuitive when you think about digital revolutions and things like that. But You can adapt the print size. So for people, particularly sort of 65 plus, that's very useful. And also ebooks can be very cheap. So as well, for someone living on a limited budget with a lot of time to read, an average retired person, ebooks make a lot of sense. But the interesting thing was, particularly when we talk to younger readers, there's a sense of digital fatigue. They're online so much, and they see actually books as a respite from that, and they want them in print format. So actually, I think it's settled down to probably about 70-30, 70 print, 30 ebook split.
And where did Panic by Jeff Abbott, so this is the third of the books you mentioned, where did this fit into what you were doing at that time?
So this is, again, a book that I look on with a lot of fondness. Jeff Abbott's a wonderful thriller writer. He'd published several books with other publishers, and with sort of not that much success in the UK. He's an American thriller writer, but he'd not been that successful in the UK. And then I remember getting the submission of Panic. I think it was in my first year at Little Brown, from the agent, and I just thought, wow, this is amazing. It was about a young guy who basically his life had all been a lie. Nothing was as he thought it was. His parents basically had brought him up, and they'd been, I won't spoil the plot for anyone who wants to read it, but everything in his life was a lie. And his world was turned upside down when he sort of found out that his parents were secret agents. And every page, there's something dramatic that happens. It's an absolutely gripping sort of textbook thriller, I would say. That was an exciting book for me, because I thought, well, actually, I think this book could be huge. And it was, again, I suppose, this mixture of creativity and commerce that excited me. I worked very, very closely for a long time on it with really talented cover designer at Little Brown, Sean Garahy. And I don't think it gets spoken enough about enough, the kind of relationship between an editor and a designer. And when that's going well, that sort of, you're more than the sum of your parts. So I was trying to convey to Sean kind of the look and feel. He was coming up with making all these creative leaps. And we were both just thinking, what is absolutely going to, when you see it on the shelf, what is absolutely going to pop out? What is absolutely going to make consumers say, I have to read that book? And he came up with this brilliant cover for it, really simple, just this red Panic on a white background, kind of beautiful finishes. I spent many hours doing the back cover copy. Like, we agonized about every single element of it. And then it worked really, really well. It was the sort of book you just put it on a shelf in a shop and it sold. So the stock turn was amazing. And it just kept on selling and selling. And in the end, it sold over 400,000 copies. And that for me was a really important book, because nothing I'd ever published at Alison Busby had that market reach. And it was an important book in lots of ways, in terms of how many copies a book could reach. I would see people reading it everywhere, which is the most exciting thing for any editor. And also, I suppose I could see, because I think people can be, and myself included, could be snooty about large companies or big corporates or whatever. It was like, well, actually, there was a huge team of people behind that book. There were some really talented salespeople who got it into all the different channels, talented marketing people, just this incredible team of people who helped that to happen. And that was really exciting for me, after this sort of scrappy, slightly, less professional, smaller publisher. It was like, wow, this is what a large publisher can do, and it can get this guy's book out into all these places, and it can sort of transform a writer's career. So that was that, and Jeff was the nicest man ever. So that was amazing as well, to be able to do that for that book.
A message from our sponsor, Vitsu, Melvin's story.
We love, love, love our Vitsu shelving. Build quality and ease of assembly is amazing, but it was your service that made the whole process such a joy.
So said Melvin from Sydney in this heartfelt message to his Vitsu planner Sophie in London. Love is a word heard a lot at Vitsu. Other verbs just don't seem to cut it. As with any customer, Sophie considered every detail, so Melvin's bookshelves were perfect for his needs. Passionate about good service, she communicates with all her customers directly, wherever they are in the world. Whether in person or on the other side of the globe, Vitsu's planners hold your hand throughout the process, time and again proving that long-distance relationships really do work. Every interaction is handled with love from Vitsu.
Vitsu's 606 Universal Shelving System is a modular, adaptable kit of parts. It can provide the perfect home for your books, and even the desk from which to write one. Visit vitsu.com, that's vitsoe.com, or request a free brochure via email at vitsu.com by quoting ATN 606.
Vitsu, makers of long-living furniture by Dieter Rams. And how did your career progress? I mean, pretty rapidly. So in 2009, you're deputy publisher at Little Brown, your publisher 2011, 2015, CEO of Orion, and then Little Brown, and then took over at Hachette UK. How did that kind of unfold for you? And then also, what has been your view of the role of mergers and of amalgamations in a kind of increasingly consolidated publishing industry, particularly as someone who began their career really outside that?
I mean, it sort of happened, I would say, organically. I think I always had a very, very good relationship with Ursula, my boss, who brought me in. We worked very closely together. I think the more we worked together, the more, and I guess she saw that I like doing new things. I like taking on new challenges, and she was comfortable to give me more. So that sort of evolved quite organically. She then was, approaching retirement age. She wanted to, it was her aim to sort of hand over to her appointed successor, and hand over in a really good way. And so that's what she did. That's what we did. So I was very lucky, very, very lucky having a champion like that. And I've always been conscious of it since then, that I want to sort of fulfill that same role for the people who I work with, and champion younger people and give them new opportunities, and people who want to learn and expand to allow them to do so. So it sort of worked in that organic way. And then actually Tim Healy-Hutchinson, who was the head of Hachette, I sort of, when Ursula retired, then I worked with him, I guess in a similar way. We always worked really well together. And then he and Arnaud Nouri, who was head of Hachette globally at the time, put me into that role, which was obviously a huge honor and responsibility, and vaguely terrifying as well.
Did it raise any eyebrows that you had come up through crime? I mean, you mentioned there was that people were snobbish about it and things like that. I mean, how do you think coming from that part of the business was perceived, and how did you feel about that?
I think, well, you never know what other people are saying, and I think publishing has many virtues. I think one of its vices is people often don't say to your face what they're saying behind your back. There's a sort of culture of niceness, which is not always nice. So yes, I'm sure people were probably snarking about that. But I guess fortunately, not to my face, they weren't. They were probably even very nice. I think editors. I think if you're an editor in the business, you're always, I feel, quite pleased when another editor gets the top job. Because in publishing, there are various routes. Obviously, you can have a marketing person at the top, you can have a finance person, you can have someone from outside the business. I'm not saying there's any right or wrong to any of it, but I definitely have always felt a kinship with other editors, because that's how I came up. And I think editors across the business, hopefully welcomed having a former editor run the business, because you're close to writers and you're close to all of that. There's definitely always a nervousness. I mean, I've experienced this in all the job changes I've done. When someone new comes in, there's always a lot of paranoia. There's a lot of fear of change. There's a lot of assumptions about who you are and what you want to do to the business. And I think because I was a crime editor, yes, I definitely felt there was an assumption that I wanted to make everything much more commercial, and that maybe I didn't understand literary fiction or whatever. So I think inevitably in any role you have to spend a certain amount of time just slightly dispelling assumptions.
And you've made a big point about your diversity initiative, so setting up dialogue books and opening offices outside London. Could you tell me a bit about what your intention was with that and how that has been going?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm trying to think where to start with this one, really. I mean, I was conscious at Allison and Busby, where I started, that it was founded by two people, Clive Allison and Margaret Busby. And Margaret Busby was the first Black woman to run a publisher in the UK. And I was always conscious, actually, and that was in 1967. And I was very conscious that when I started in 1997, things hadn't moved on very far from that. And I was, frankly, I'm conscious now things haven't moved on very far. So I suppose I was very lucky in that I always had that in my mind of, and also because Alison Busby had this incredibly rich backlist of writers like C.L.R. James or Buchi Emechita, or, sort of Margaret had bought an enormous number of incredible novels and nonfiction by writers of colour. I was always really conscious, I guess, that wasn't replicated across the industry, and that there wasn't enough representation. And I suppose it's always something that has, I was, I guess, lucky to have read those books and to have had that in my mind. So I always, I suppose, wanted to do something. The catalyst really was a woman of colour in the business. So this was 5 years ago, a bit over 5 years ago, writing to me. So I wasn't in my new role then, I was in my previous role. But she wrote to me and just said, kind of in confidence, she told me about some of the things she'd experienced in the business that were nothing like things I'd ever experienced and were really, really bad things. And I just thought, God, this is long overdue. We have to do something. So I would say, and so we started, I asked Tim, my boss, can I start this Changing the Story diversity initiative? We have to do something. He absolutely said, yes, absolutely, do that. And then put it out to people who wants to be part of this. And there was a mixture of people from across the organisation. We all got together, right, what are we going to do? And it's sort of grown from there to be over 1,000 people, 8 networks, all this stuff. I don't think it's something that I felt was necessary and overdue rather than something that was a laudable thing to do. I still feel as an industry, as a company, whatever, we should have been on this far, far, far sooner. I mean, by that sort of 50 years ago, or more. So I think it's sort of very late in the day, but equally, I'm very heartened by all the work that's been done. You mentioned dialogue books. Charmaine Lovegrove was an absolute game changer for us when she proposed the idea of dialogue books to me and to the MD of Little Brown, Charlie King, who's been a big supporter of hers. And she's just flown since she set that up. It's been enormously successful commercially, creatively, and culturally as well. And Charmaine is the patron of one of the two patrons, her and Nick Davis, one of the MDs. They're the two patrons of Changing the Story. And she's made the most enormous impact, sort of as a publisher and as a sort of in-house activist, I would say. Yeah.
So it's a rule of the show that we always ask about money and how it interacts with people's writing lives. And it seems to me that in some ways money is the elephant in the room of the diversity debate, because, with a few exceptions, the amount that publishers pay for books doesn't, it's much less than the time investment of authors putting in. I mean, wouldn't the most powerful thing that publishers could do if they wanted to increase the diversity of writing books is to pay their authors more?
I guess I've got a particular philosophy on this, in that in book publishing, a writer gets paid in advance against royalties. And then if the book's successful, for every book that's sold, the writer receives a royalty. If you take a book that we just talked about, Jeff Abbott, Panic, Jeff received a very modest advance for his book. But the ambition that we had for it from the start was absolutely huge. And Jeff realised, I don't know, tens of times more money from that book than that initial advance. So in the best sort of system, publishers, will pay in advance against a book to a writer, but then, when it does well, the writer shares in those spoils, really equitably, and will make a lot of money from that. I'm thinking, there are some dialogue authors, whose books have earned out very quickly and have made a lot of money above and beyond that. And the same I can think of elsewhere. I mean, I would also point to a really innovative company, Bookouture, which does ebook first, and has very innovative digital marketing and a different sort of business model. We acquired them 4 years ago. Their model is they pay high ebook royalties, but no advance. So writers don't receive an advance, but they do receive high ebook royalties, and they receive them on a quarterly basis, which is unusual in the industry. So I think, I guess my answer is, I think there are a lot of different business models. I would like to think that we share money with authors in a really, really fair way. I think I would never say any of us are perfect, but for me, if we're talking about diversity and what we can do more of, for me, it's about the amplification of those voices, about how we market them, how we publicize, how we get them to the greatest number of readers. If we get a book to the greatest number of readers, the writer will receive a very large amount of money for that. The advance is just an advance.
So can we talk about how the business model of publishing works in terms of the revenue that say yourself at Hachette or another large commercial company works, in terms of the money that comes in? How is the division in terms of how that is spent, in terms of physically printing books, in terms of paying salaries, in terms of marketing, publicity, and also in terms of paying writers? How does that division work?
I can't go into all the specifics, but I can go through what some of the component parts are.
Okay.
So obviously, I think people often conceive that kind of printing the book is a very large part of it. It is a large part, but there's also physical distribution is a huge part of the mix. So we recently launched a new distribution centre, which was built from scratch, which is tens of millions of pounds investment, and that investment is about making sure that books, they go round conveyor belts. It's a books to person system, which is a kind of new system with this. It's incredibly high tech, incredible IT, and it basically means that all around the clock, books are going out all around the world to all our bookshops everywhere. Book distribution is one of the largest bits of the pie in terms of the investment. So there's the printing of the books, then they go to the warehouse, they get packaged up, they get sent out to bookshops. We have daily, more than daily deliveries to most bookshops around the world. So that's a very big investment. Then after that, yes, you've got publicity. The investment obviously is largely in people, but then marketing, where increasingly that's digital marketing. So it's sort of paying for advertising online so that books get noticed. We have a lot of sales reps who go around shops talking to them about the books, head office reps. We've got designers, we've got photo shoots. There's a lot of different bits to and obviously we've got editors. And I think also the other bit that doesn't get talked about enough, in my view, is sort of copy editors, structural, proofreaders, people who are making sure that when the book comes out, it's perfectly, it looks, everything is accurate, everything is checked, the grammar's right, all of that sort of thing. And that's an investment if you do it right. And I don't think we always do it as perfectly as we can, but we try. So there are all of those costs. And then, of course, you've got things like office costs. For instance, we're doing these national offices where we're opening offices in Newcastle, Sheffield, Manchester, Edinburgh, Bristol, and as well as the big office in London. And so you've got those costs as well. So I think and I know this, having spoken to friends about it, in a punter's mind, it's often about just printing the book and then it going out. but actually got all these other costs on top of it.
And I know that there's limits in terms of commercially sensitive information you can give, but in terms of the ballpark amount from yourselves or other publishers of the revenue that is actually used for paying writers, are you able to give an indication of what that is?
It's not something that we release externally, and I don't believe it's something I've seen released by other publishers. But I would say I can only speak for ourselves, it's a very large part of that pie. If it were a pie, it would be a slice that you'd feel sick after eating. Let's say that.
Okay. Can we move on to the J.K. Rowling and Robert Galbraith situation? Is it right that was at a sort of lunch in 2011 where this was sort of presented to you, as it were?
Yep, that's correct. I was due to have lunch with Neil Blair, who's an agent, and kind of came in for lunch, and then I saw he was with someone. I just thought, oh, that's odd. I thought it was just going to be me and Neil, and then she turned around and I recognised it was J.K. Rowling. So that was a surprise.
So just for those who may not be familiar with this, so obviously J.K. Rowling had huge success with Harry Potter, but then had written these books under a different name. They were initially published under a different name, and then her cover was eventually blown. But I mean, in terms of, how did you run that as a publisher? And then when it was revealed that she was the author, how did it affect sales and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so basically her intent was to do something that readers would not, that didn't use her celebrity in any way, and to be judged purely on the merits of a book. Mm-hmm. So that was her intent with the Robert Galbraith thing. She wanted to publish 3 books before being open about it. It was challenging internally to do it. Because normally, obviously, you have a writer who's involved in the publicity and things like that. And this time, we didn't, and had to, give all sorts of reasons why Robert wasn't available to do things. So very, very few people knew about, who the actual author was. The really pleasing thing about it was that the first book, The Cuckoo's Calling, got amazing reviews, really, really amazing reviews. And incredible reviews online as well. So exceptional reviews from readers. It was a #1 bestseller in audio. So it did incredibly well right from the start in audio. And we were about to publish the paperback, and everyone on the team was, who didn't know who the author was really excited about it and thought, we're going to have a big success with it. And then I'm sure you know this, or it's that it was then revealed because someone in the solicitors, the wife of one of the solicitors, had told a friend about it, and it had sort of got it. And I think she tweeted in, because India Knight tweeted to say how much she enjoyed the book. And then I think the person had tweeted India Knight telling her who it was. So anyway, it sort of came out. It wasn't what the plan was. It wasn't what was expected. I personally felt very disappointed because I really wanted the 3 books to come out before, which was the plan, and for the books to become, bestsellers, before anyone knew. I mean, that said, when it did come out, obviously a lot of people wanted to read it. It did really, really well, and the subsequent books have done really well as well. But there's still a part of me that thinks, it would have been really nice to, if we'd been able to do that original plan.
In terms of the booksellers that you deal with as a publisher, I was seeing that you were pretty tight-lipped about Amazon in an interview, but were kind of had much more open views on Waterstones, and particularly on how that firm has reinvented itself in some ways. With Amazon, say as much or as little as you're comfortable, but particularly with Waterstones and with how the interactions between yourselves as a publisher and booksellers, both corporate and independent, how does that work?
I think it's the most important thing for me is having a really I think having a diverse ecosystem of book selling is highly important. I think on the one hand, it's really important to be wherever people are. So I would never disparage online book selling. I would never disparage Amazon, because they're a highly successful business and a lot of people spend a lot of time on Amazon buying things. I believe as a business, we need to be incredibly consumer focused and consumer obsessed, as Amazon themselves are, and to really, really be where consumers are and make things easy for consumers. I don't think we should put unnecessary barriers up for consumers. I don't think we should say to consumers, you can get our books here, but not here, or to, anything like that. I think we should make it incredibly easy. I think if you're a consumer, I just want you to be able to buy our book in whatever way feels comfortable, whatever format, anywhere. But part of that I think as a nation, maybe we have taken for granted, and I hope post-COVID we're taking less for granted, is the role of high street booksellers in that. I think often when people go online, it's because they've seen something on the high street that they like, and they go online to try and find a better price. I hope and I think that people more and more are starting to think, well, actually, if I keep doing that, then the high street shop that I love might go under. So I think it's very important for us as publishers and for consumers to sort of acknowledge the role that actual kind of physical spaces have in their life. For us at Hachette, that means we sponsor Independent Booksellers Week, which is really an important thing for us, which is a celebration of independent bookshops. I think the really good thing on independent bookshops is, after decline for many years, that we're now starting to see more independent bookshops on the high street, which is fantastically encouraging. The caveat I would say to that is they tend to be in more affluent areas. So for people who are low SES, they have less access to sort of high street bookshops, which is an issue. But I think for us, it's really important for us to, as well as acknowledging that a lot of people shop online, to really support the high street in whatever we can, because the high street has influence in all sorts of ways that we don't see.
And we're coming up against the end of our time, but a final question from me was about hiring. So this seems to be the other kind of part of the diversity debate, beyond writers themselves, but how people get into the industry. And again, there's been some criticism, not just of Hachette, but this bookseller research on class, a frustration with regard to internships, nepotism, networking, that sort of thing. So when you're bringing people on, how do you find them? How do you pay them, and how do you, has there been change in that area as well?
Yeah, I think there has. Definitely when I started in the industry, there were so many internships that were, godchildren of authors or children of staff or whatever. Unfortunately, that's gone. And so now for our internship scheme, we have several different schemes. And I would say most of them have a sort of positive action ethos to them, in that we're actively looking for applications from people from underrepresented groups.
Are they paid, those schemes?
Yeah. Oh, yes, everything's paid. Yeah, that's the other thing. When I started out, my internships, nothing was paid. Yeah. You were lucky. occasionally you get travel money, and
you had to come in from Sussex.
Yeah. So you sort of end up using I use the remnants of my student loan to do that. So now, it's totally different. Everything's paid. We don't do anything unpaid. Everything goes through a system that is about, as I say, the kind of positive action ethos, trying to get, more diverse intake, paid, and also try and make sure that in those internships that people get more kind of upskilling people as well. And we recently, one of our divisions, Orion, recently did a great scheme of kind of remote work experience, remote work experience. So for people who can't come to London, who might have other commitments, who can't take that much time off, these were 2-week paid placements that were just digital. And I just saw actually an email from someone, one of the people on that, who managed to get another job, and that experience has been very valuable to him getting on the job, which was very satisfying.
Was there any pushback of bringing that cultural change? Were there people who wanted their godchildren to be interned, and how do you finesse that cultural change?
My experience is, yes, there was a huge pushback from, and I'm obviously not going to name any names, but yes, there was huge pushback. And my lesson I learned from it is, you can't, something like that, you actually couldn't finesse it. I literally sometimes had to say, we're just doing this. You can like it or not like it, because you can try and finesse something like that, but at the end of the day, it's something that we needed to do, and I had to recognise some people won't like it, and some people are kind of blockers, and if people are trying to block something like that and they don't like it, then Hachette wouldn't be the right place for them, to put it quite bluntly.
Sure. Okay, David. Well, look, thanks for being a great guest and always take notes, and wishing you all the best with everything going forward.
Thanks so much, Simon. Thanks for having me.
That was the Always Take Notes interview with David Shelley. He's not on social media himself, but you can follow Hachette at Hachette UK, and their website is hachette.co.uk. We wanted to draw your attention to our crowdfunding page on Patreon. If you've been enjoying Always Take Notes, please do consider supporting us there. It helps us to keep the podcast going.
If you support us on Patreon, you can get a great selection of rewards, including a shout out on the show and a selection of successful magazine pictures.
If you pledge $10 a month, you also get a free 2-month trial to Otter, worth $26, alongside the other rewards. Otter offers automated transcription and live note-taking for in-person and virtual meetings. I found it to be a huge help when organising interview material.
Thanks again for supporting Always Take Notes.
Hello, it's us again. I couldn't make this interview, but Simon did a stellar job and it was very interesting. What was your main takeaway from the discussion you had with David?
I think it was just really excellent to talk to someone who's at this sort of nexus of editorial and commerce, right at the top of a major publisher, Hachette being the second largest trade publisher. We haven't had someone doing that job on before, and getting a sense of the sort of mix of responsibilities that they had. But we discussed, and we're actually, we're keen to get some more people in these big seats. And clearly it was a mix of sort of setting creative direction, but also running a major institution and then cresting social currents. I mean, he talked about what he was doing in response to Black Lives Matter and the things that had come out of that. So clearly it's a big job that he did, and it was good to get into that. And I think we asked all the tough questions that we usually do, and he was candid on those. So yeah, it was good to have him along. Agreed.
I enjoyed hearing about his rapid ascent up the corporate ladder. I couldn't believe that he was
meteoric, right?
Yeah. Although meteors fall to Earth, as the Economist Style Guide says, they do not decline. But yeah, publishing director at 23, my jaw dropped. And I also enjoyed hearing about Hachette's attempts to diversify, as you say, both in terms of race and other demographic qualities, but also in terms of location, opening offices around the country. So as to remove some of that London focus.
Anyway, yeah, it's, as we were saying, it's definitely a kind of vein of guests that we want to get more on the show. So hopefully there'll be more of these big bosses to come. Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acomb.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvin. Our score is by Jess Danheiser, and our graphics are by James Edgar.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Always Take Notes, on Twitter at Take Notes Always. Our Patreon page is under Always Take Notes, and if you'd like to get in touch with us via our website or leave a review on iTunes, please do.
Many thanks. Goodbye.